Hey, I think I'll make a start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate it and very grateful for everyone showing an interest in our new British standard on inclusive PPE. I'm Sarah Gibbs. I'm the committee manager for a number of the PPE committees in BSI, and we're very grateful for you to be here. So I thought I'd go through a bit of housekeeping. The webinar is going to be recorded. Cameras will remain off for every participant apart from the host and panelists here. We ask for everyone to post questions in the Q&A function, which I'll go through in a second, and mics will be muted throughout. If you do want to pose a question, you can use the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom of your screen. And you can also talk to us on LinkedIn using the hashtags InclusivePPE, BSI, and standards. And you can find our LinkedIn page there. And also just to let you know, a recording is being made and will be made available to you afterwards. So today we're going to go over a welcome and introduction. We're going to cover the key objectives and benefits of the inclusive PPE, an overview of the draft standard, the public consultation process, and opening up to Q&A. I'm now going to pass over to Natalie Wilson, who is the chair of our drafting panel.
Thanks, Sarah. So morning, everyone. Just again to say thank you again for attending, and we're really excited to be presenting this. A lot of work has gone into this so far, and we're really keen to explain what we've been doing. Bring the next slide, please. So you've met myself and Sarah. As Sarah said, she's the committee manager that's been supporting the drafting of the standard, and I am the chair of the drafting panel, and we've been supported by a large number of other individuals who come from a wide range of different parts of industry, which we'll talk through, and we're really pleased that Brian, Roshi and Brett are representatives from the committee who will be here to help answer any of the Q&A towards the end. So without further ado, we will go through the standard. So the first thing that we had to do as part of drafting the standard was to create a definition of inclusive PPE because it didn't exist. So we've presented here what the definition of inclusive PPE is, and wanted to explain it to kind of set the context for what we'll talk to you about through the rest of the standard. So inclusive PPE for us is PPE that's designed, manufactured and selected to provide equity of access to and provision of correctly fitting PPE for all wearers, providing the required levels of personal protection without creating an obvious point of difference between wearers or inadvertently creating secondary risks or hazards, including trips, falls and snagging. And as we go through, we'll explain why those different aspects are important to what we've been reviewing. So to set the scene, we have always looked at the wearer as the centre of the approach to looking at inclusive PPE. There are three other really important parts of this that have to come together in order to support the wearer. The first is the employer, so the purchaser or buyer of the PPE, making sure that they're aware of what's available, making sure that they understand what the requirements are of their diverse wearers. The suppliers, if you haven't got a product to buy, then you can't provide the correct inclusive PPE. So really important part is the suppliers, manufacturers and distributors who are developing product and selling it to the employers to make sure that they're communicating so that employers know what's available and suppliers know what is missing from their current ranges. And then the third area, which is outside of what we've been looking at in this standard but is important as an overall holistic consideration, is the standardization process. So test methods and PPE standards relating to products. We've identified through the European Commission has done a report to look at inclusive PPE and where there are issues with it, and myself and Sarah are working at a European level to review that as part of a working group that will be looking at supporting the technical standards makers in reviewing inclusive PPE. So it's slightly outside of the intent of this, the scope of this standard, but it's an important consideration. So next slide, please. Just taking a second. So we're going to talk through now the key objectives of the standard and in consideration of some of the benefits of inclusive PPE. So the definition and the scope and objectives of what we were trying to achieve with the standard is to make a standard that was applicable to everybody. So large organisations, individuals who are all involved in the purchasing, provision and use of inclusive PPE. And this covers all working environments, so anywhere where PPE is required. It's designed to address the needs of all users and promoting equitable access to safety equipment, which we know in turn creates equitable access to the workplace for certain individuals. What it doesn't do is cover any of the technical requirements relating to product. So this is a guide to help create an environment where inclusive PPE is more well known, well discussed, and looking through what can be provided. So the benefits of inclusive PPE, the next slide. So why is inclusive PPE important? We know that inclusive PPE fosters inclusive cultures and that it's really important aspect of recruitment and retention of a diverse workforce. One of the reports that we've looked at is a Trade Union Congress report which looked at female responses to PPE and 57% of them said that their PPE sometimes or significantly hampered their work. So this is where we're starting to talk about those secondary risks caused by product not being appropriate. There's also worldwide issues around this. It's not just a British problem. So we've got a Canadian report that also looked at women's experiences with PPE, found that 58% are using PPE that they know is the wrong size, at least some of the time. So it's fairly widespread. And 28% don't wear PPE that they're supposed to because it doesn't fit them properly. And that's where we get compliance issues and, again, secondary risks that are caused by not wearing PPE. And 38% of those responded had to use a workaround to make their PPE fit. So individuals are having to make alterations themselves in order to be able to wear appropriately fitting PPE. So we know that inclusive PPE and the availability of inclusive PPE brings increased adherence to wearing compliant PPE, because if it fits you, then you're more likely to wear it. It also reduces the risk of illnesses and longer term issues that are related to wearing and using non-inclusive PPE or inappropriately fitting PPE. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is reduce the risk due to incorrectly fitting PPE, wanting people to want to wear the PPE and therefore increasing compliance, and thinking about things like the fact that if you're wearing something that doesn't fit you properly and you're concerned about tripping or some other additional hazard that is being inadvertently created by the ill-fitting PPE, that's a distraction that you absolutely don't want in an environment where PPE is required to be worn. So we'll now take you through an overview of the draft standard. So from what we've just explained, there's clearly there's a lack of awareness of the issue of inclusive PPE and the fact that a lack of awareness of the impact that it has on a significant proportion of the workforce. So we often think about inclusive PPE or that sort of terminology in terms of minority groups. Women make up 50% of the UK population, and almost every industry is looking to increase the number of females working within their industry. So it's a really important part of what is how those companies can kind of develop that. It's also not just about women, obviously. We're talking about all kinds of inclusive requirements, which again are in the definitions. We have a long list of definitions and terms where we've included as broad a scope as we can in terms of specific needs that may need to be addressed. And there's inconsistent availability of inclusive PPE, and that is largely down to whether the supply chain is providing it, but also a lack of awareness of what is available on the market already. So what became obvious was that there was no clear guidance available for the provision of inclusive PPE and to support those looking to provide inclusive PPE. So whether that's an individual wanting to raise something to their employer, or whether it's an employer not knowing where to go or what direction to turn in terms of reviewing the provision of PPE that they currently have. So the development of the British Standard was intended so that we can aim to improve the safety, health and well-being of all individuals by promoting accessibility and inclusivity in PPE provision to in turn help support with workforce diversity. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there were a lot of us involved in this. There's over 30 individuals. They've included end users, health and safety professionals, manufacturers, and standards makers who all met regularly to discuss the draft standard in an intense 6-month period, which in context is at least a third quicker than has been done previously. So we really were pushing to get this out because we know it's important and we know it's urgently needed in industry. So the draft standard will shortly be made available for comment, and we are hoping to publicise that in the next month or so, and Sarah will talk you through how that process will work and what we do once we've had comments from you. So the next thing I'm going to explain is how this guide can help you. We have various sections within the guide, and we've sort of categorized them across 4 different areas. So the first part is the foundation, so that's the scope, the references, terms and definitions, and whilst that's a requirement of the standardisation process, it's also interesting because it gives you language and definitions that can be used to have internal conversations around diversity. We know that that can sometimes be a reason why people don't have those conversations, so it can also be used to support those sorts of discussions. We've also looked at core processes. So how do you select and purchase inclusive PPE? How do you engage with your workforce? How do you identify suppliers that have got product offerings that you can look at? Considerations that need to be in place for fitting and adjustment that might be required for various different reasons, and maintaining and inspecting inclusive PPE. There may be reasons why you need a different process for those, depending on the needs of the individuals and the inclusive PPE that's being provided. We've also then looked at accessibility and life cycle considerations. So this is about the long-term use of the PPE and consideration of things like people have different requirements for inclusive PPE throughout their careers. It could be a short-term requirement. Somebody might be going through a cancer treatment, for example, and needs a stoma bag, and therefore there's an adaptation required that isn't a long-term, hopefully not a long-term requirement, but something that represents reasons why people's needs change throughout a period of time. There's also some information around documentation and record keeping. There are requirements obviously for those things within the within PPE provision anyway, but there's some considerations that we've can put in specifically relating to inclusive PPE. And then we've looked at future-proofing and improvement. The really key thing here is that this isn't used as a tick box exercise to say, yes, we've provided inclusive PPE once, and that is it. So it's about creating awareness and training within organisations so that people who have got workforces that are responsible to them, supervisors, team leaders, managers, know how to what's available and how to support the people working with them. It's also about how do you collate feedback and continuous improvement and any variations that might be required in it. Key to the whole piece around inclusive PPE is continual consultation with the workforce, because that workforce is changing and developing, and also because individuals within that, their needs will change, and we're really keen for this to be used as a process rather than an end point where you've ticked a box for provision. So I'm going to pass back to Sarah now, who is going to take you through the public consultation process.
Thank you very much, Nat. So the public consultation process is your opportunity to have your say on the draft standard. It is open to everyone. You don't have to be a member of the committee to actually have your say. It's open to industry professionals, researchers, general public, users of PPE, especially. We would really appreciate having your feedback on how that works. It's everything that we would, have you to look through the draft, review it, consider what you think needs to be changed, if you think it's good, if it's bad. And we want you to have a structured method of being able to feed back to us. So to do that, you would need to go to the BSI Standards Development Portal. The website is there for you. You would need to search for BS 30417 in the public commenting section, and you would have access to the draft and be able to go through and make comments on that. We do ask that you make the comments in a clear and concise and technically relevant manner. And we, if possible, to provide a preferred method of text. So say, for instance, there is something that is written in a manner that you don't agree with. If you can provide a suggested version, that would be great. And you would need to quote if it's editorial, technical, or a general comment. So once you've submitted that comment, what happens? It doesn't just get lost in the ether, doesn't disappear. We actually do take it really seriously, and we're really grateful for any of these comments that you do send through. So once the deadline has passed for the public comments, they'll be collated into a single document. We will then review it as a panel and go through and whether or not we accept it, modify or reject it. We will have reasoning behind that. And if there are any significant issues, the standard may undergo further revision, depending on the comments that we use. The public consultation period is 8 weeks, and we're hoping that that starts at the end of February. I will email you all with that date and details of how to actually access the public consultation process. We can't accept anything past that 8-week deadline, and the dates will be available on the BSI portal. And if there are any questions on that, please let me know. And your input, like I said, is so important. It helps us shape better and more effective standards. We ask that you read the draft carefully and focus on areas where improvements are needed. Again, use the clear, specific language. And if you have any questions, you can either go through the BSI Standards Development Portal or come direct to myself, whichever's easiest for you. Okay, Q&A. We have some questions.
We do. I've just had a look. I know the panel have been very diligently answering some of the questions. The ones that are open at the moment all seem to relate to product standards. So I just wanted to reiterate that the product standards are outside of the scope of this committee. So we aren't addressing things like physiological differences. We're identifying ways in which employers can review that and considerations that should be taken into account when manufacturers are developing product. However, if for those of you who might have missed towards the beginning, Sarah and I are working at a European level to address inclusivity and considerations for inclusivity at a European level, as I say, and we will be supporting the technical committees who will be addressing some of the issues that have been raised. Sustainability is another one of the working groups that's working horizontally, and the groups are interacting with one another. There's also a really important piece of work that's being done at European level, looking at anthropometrical data and updating that for Europe, because we haven't got up-to-date workforce data that we can effectively use in standardization at the minute.
Okay, I'm just quickly trying to go through these questions. Have we answered, how does this new guidance affect the implementation of low-use, multi-use PPE being shared? I think that is covered within the sustainability working group that is being developed in the Joint Technical Committee at European level, but there are considerations within the draft of how to be effective and not necessarily being shared. I think that is a completely different.
Yeah, I would say it'd be interesting to know what context that PPE is being shared, and how we and the specific environment where that's being used. The approach of the standard is to make sure that whatever you're providing is fit for purpose for the workforce. So if there's a reason why an individual can't share the pool stock or the specific PPE that you're referring to, then the guide will explain to you how and why you should consider doing something different about that. So that would be my suggestion on that piece.
Okay, this one's a difficult one. I don't know whether, Brian, you want to help with this one. Having done research on the impact of climatic heat on construction workers' health and well-being, the use of PPE is always mentioned as detrimental rather than beneficial. We also know that hot temperatures affect men, women differently. I was wondering if you've considered outdoor thermal comfort by gender as an inclusive factor in the standard.
Okay, so yes is the quick answer for heat. It is a very new level that is, well, issue that has been brought up. I mean, obviously the problem has been long-standing, but this committee is going to try and address these long-standing issues that have not been addressed, or at least properly articulated to standard bodies in the past. It's all I can say is that we will have to get on and do it, because at this moment in time, there hasn't been, I'm sure there have been studies, but it hasn't been brought to the committee, and it hasn't been considered yet. But it definitely is within our scope to get it done.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, we've got them coming in quite a bit, sorry.
Yeah, we've got quite a few. So I think we've addressed the question around sustainability. Sustainability specifically is outside of the scope of this project. However, long-term viability of products is, and we are looking at sustainability in PPE at a European level. We've got a question here for Roshi. So the question is, how receptive have you found industry to be about inclusive PPE at the moment? It is an important issue that should be considered by all, and it's great to see the standard coming out.
I'd say definitely over time we've definitely seen this change. I think we've moved away from one size fits all, and we're starting to consider the needs that we need more female appropriate PPE. We're starting to consider factors such as menopause, menstruation, breastfeeding. So I think potentially with the standard coming out, there might be a market for new products to come out that will then actually meet the needs of the user. But one thing that we encourage within the standard is keeping the user involved within a continuous loop of feedback, so that as our needs are changing, it's actually considered and it's evolving with the market and the workforce.
And I think it's really important that this guide also raises that issue, because there are some manufacturers who are doing some really great things around inclusive PPE, and those processes have started, but it needs to be more widely available, and we need to make sure that where users are able to access it through their employers, and that employers know that it exists and why it's important. Thanks, Roshi. We've got a question here about whether bespoke PPE is covered in it, as it's referred to in the PPE regs. We had a lot of discussion about the PPE regs and what it does say and what it doesn't say. The fact is that whatever it says at the minute isn't causing or focusing people enough on inclusive PPE, and that is the reason why this standard's important. It's a complementary standard and guide. It isn't designed to supersede or take over any of the other legal requirements, and that is explained within the standard that we've put together. The next question, have we covered products promoted as unisex? Yes, we have. We have furiously discussed this because we don't feel that unisex is appropriate. If you're looking at products that fit everybody, moving away from that unisex term is really important, because you know, as women who've been using PPE or supplying PPE for years, the frustration is that we get to a stage where we end up reverting back to unisex. Brett, I don't know if you want to add something on this as well, because I know you were involved in the definition of fit for form and why that was important.
Yeah, sure. As an inclusive employer, it's important that you've got fit for purpose PPE for all your wearers. And rather than just male and female, it's important that we take recognition of everybody's form and their shape and size. And that's why we've started to introduce the terminology fit for form as opposed to male and female, etc. And creating just a very broad and deep size range for everybody, and ensuring that the suppliers take note of the anthropometrical data for both forms.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, you may have just covered this, but just so I have it clear, will any of this address the myriad of suppliers claiming women's fit but with no evidence? The Green Claims Code is great for sustainability. There isn't anything for women's PPE. Again, no, there isn't. That's outside of the scope of what the standard was able to address. However, what it does do is include some really detailed processes or kind of ideas of how you would review PPE to make sure that it's fit for purpose, and that if somebody is saying that there's a women's fit range, that you use women to trial that kit to let you know whether it actually does fit or not, and whether it's appropriate for that. So it would be more of a process that we've are suggesting that you introduce, as opposed to a kind of Green Claim Code equivalent to that. Next question. This is great that we've got so much engagement. We really really appreciate it. It's much better than us just sat here looking at each other. Can you say more about the European anthropometrical data collection? When is it due to publish? Not yet. It is very fresh. The first meeting is next month. So it is hot off the press. And again, it will be, if you follow BSI or even myself and Zara directly on LinkedIn, you will see us start to talk about that as it becomes available. Okay. So next question. I'm in an office and traveling. I wear a disabled sunflower lanyard. Is there ideas for neurodivergent disabled people? Should they be happy to share they have a protected characteristic? Not that we want to be singled out, but sometimes for health and safety issues, it's important. I'm happy to take this unless someone else wants to. So this was one of the, again, one of the key discussion points that we had. The point about inclusive PPE is that it doesn't differentiate, and we put that into the definition. We also explained it with the idea of a menopause PPE, that you don't want to be wearing a big M on your chest that tells somebody that there's something different about you. So inclusive PPE, in the way that we've defined it, is that it's fit for purpose for everybody, and that it doesn't differentiate or cause secondary risks and hazards. So we hope that what we've put into the standard gives some guidance on how to address that. But if we haven't, and you think it should go further, then please give us the comments back, because we will be reviewing all of the comments that come in through this process. The next question, I think, is also around standardization. So given the approximate 12-month lead time for arc flash garments to be tested and certified for use, this could present significant challenges when trying to make personal adaptations to comply with the new standard. So yes, this is again a question about what is able to be done with PPE currently. I don't know if Brian, do you want to take this one from a manufacturer's point of view?
Sorry, I've been just writing a.
Don't worry then, that's fine.
No. Can you repeat the question, please, so that
given the 12-month lead time for arc flash garments to be tested and certified, this could present significant challenges when trying to make personal adaptations to comply with the new standard.
Right. Yes. That's correct, and that is to say, I can imagine an example whereby an individual who has specific needs in a working environment is sourcing, or the employer is sourcing PPE for that individual, and there's none on the market, and engagement with the manufacturer is meant for the design and certification of that type of PPE. That is a challenge, particularly not so much for the standard, but for the certification and manufacturer to bring it to market, which is something that we as a committee will have to address after the publication of the standard, because we are very aware that although the standard is written for employers in the help to source suitable PPE for their employees, there is the next step of helping the market be able to bring that PPE to the individual that needs to in a cost-effective way. It doesn't answer your question directly because the issues that you raised are real. I know that personally, and so it is something that we, as a committee, are interested and will engage with manufacturers and certification bodies for it. But
Yeah,
that's where we stand.
You're absolutely right, Brian. I think the other thing, just to remind everybody, is this is not a technical product standard. So the scope of this standard is giving a guide of how you go about doing this. And as Brian said, for manufacturers, it's really difficult as well. It's helping them to understand what they can and can't do. And so the work that we're trying to do at a European level is also trying to consider this. So how do you certify a helmet for somebody whose head might be larger than others for medical reasons, or just because that's the shape of their head, and that's what we're trying to address initially, is to look at what are the needs, and then be able to use the standardization process to make sure that that is also fit for purpose to support wearers. Okay.
Happy to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay, so the research and work done by Dr. Debbie Jansen has covered a lot of this. Is this being referenced in the standard? To give an answer to that, we are aware of the work that Dr. Jansen has contributed to the SHP report. It hasn't been referenced because it is quite different to what the standard actually does. But yes, we are aware of it.
Sarah, actually Debbie's online. I see
Oh.
from other questions further down, and she's offered some support and to the committee in the work that we will continue to do on this subject.
Fantastic, thank you, Debbie. I'll be in touch then if that's good for you. Thank you. And again, Sandy, delighted to see this initiative and working with BSI in my role at the Chartered Institute of Building. Can offer links with the USA and MENA, where some interesting surveys are coming through, perhaps can help there with the climate and heat issues. Sandy, we're very grateful to you because we know full well how much you've contributed towards this and actually kickstarted quite a bit of it. So thank you very much. We really appreciate that. The next question, Jay Wilson, have or will disability groups been approached for comments or input? Indeed, they have. We are very much interested in getting input from any disability groups or any minority groups at all. We are contacting lots of our government contacts and spreading the word as much as possible. We will be doing that quite a lot. And if you have any contacts that you would like us to contact specifically, please let me know and we can make sure that they have been approached for comments and input also.
We did approach a number of charities as well, and bodies across the UK to get as much engagement as possible. You can't write an inclusive standard or a standard about inclusive PPE if your panel isn't representative of the workforce that needs this standard to be put in place. So we've been very conscious to encourage participation from as wide a group as possible.
As the standard will cover multiple products category, will there be specific criteria for each product category to adhere to comply with the standard?
I think this again is where we've got this crossover into the technical standards. So this isn't a product standard. This is a guidance for how you practically implement these requirements and inclusive PPE.
Okay, just a comment, understanding that we need to be inclusive with our fit for form is essential. Menswear is longer in the arms and legs, but is also generally available in a larger range of sizes. Thank you very much. Martin Cottam, lovely to see you. Thank you very much. I chair ISO Tech Committee 283, which is currently revising ISO 45001, the OHS Management System Standard. The revision of the standard will place greater emphasis on the need for organisations to address the diverse nature of the workforce and to address specific needs of all workers, including gender-specific aspects. I think will very much complement the message that your standard is delivering, and your standard will help people meet the requirements in the revised ISO 45001. Yes, completely agree. Thank you very much. Natalie, you're answering that one. Do you see the principle of the duty to fit test RPE being applied in a similar manner to other items such as hearing protection, face, eye protection, headgear, etc.? Brett, question for you, I think. And I'm sorry, we're overrunning.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Having a bit of a problem with the audio there. I mean, in principle, yes, it should apply to all types of PPE, is my opinion. And it's important that we find solutions for our diverse workforce. Certainly, in terms of helmets, I've worked with ambulance service colleagues who have cochlear implants and have to have and source a different type of protective helmet. And so the principle applies right across the board. We need to find PPE that is inclusive for our diverse workforces.
Thank you. Okay, and we've had someone put a part of the scope there for everyone to have a look at. Will the standard cover procedures for PPE during pregnancy? You mentioned earlier about PPE needing to cover shorter term requirements. However, as pregnancy would feature an evolving form of the person, has this had a dedicated consideration?
I think that question, with also the one that I accidentally said I would answer live and meant to type, sorry, is to say that we've tried to cover all considerations. So at any point in a worker's working career, that they may have changing needs, and that's the whole point about the evolution of it and the continual assessment and engagement with individuals and wearer groups, so that you can review that as somebody's body changes in the short term or longer term. And what happens when somebody comes back from maternity, their body will be in a different state. It's gone through a completely different, a huge traumatic experience in terms of body. So yeah, absolutely, this is about promoting the continual engagement with workforces to understand what their requirements are now, how they change in the short term, and how they change and need to be adapted to in the longer term as well.
And just checking, does that cover the circumstances and life-changing circumstances and disabilities such as lost limbs, deaf persons, and ear loss as examples where more generic PPE may not suit?
Yeah, absolutely, that would.
Okay, brilliant. Does this standard recognise that some PPE for specific tasks does not need to be inclusive because the task should be carried out by people who need to be fit and able-bodied? For example, do fall protection harnesses really need to consider this, given that people working at height need to be fit and able-bodied to reduce follow-on risks like falling and rescue?
So I would say that as a committee, we would not identify any situation where PPE should not be considered as having a requirement for it to be inclusive. There may be somebody, for example, who is able to perform a role but may have lost a limb or be a partial amputee, who could still wear a harness and be able to complete a job. The key point about this standard is that it should be for the wearer and the employer to discuss what their needs are, and for the supply chain to be able to support that. And that's the key message for this. So we absolutely wouldn't say there was any specific area where PPE should not be inclusive. We would say the absolute opposite.
Although completely wrong, but could this lead to some discrimination in employment from companies that may see it as too much hassle and potential additional cost for unique PPE? I don't agree with this, but the reality is that this could happen.
Again, I think this is where we're trying to go with the standard, is that there's some information in there that can help employees to understand what they can ask for, and how this shouldn't be considered as a nice to have, but this is a really critical part. If you have a diverse workforce, you need to provide PPE that fits that diverse workforce, and that's where it starts and ends. In terms of that, and we know that cost is being used as a reason why people might consider not doing it now, but there are legal requirements under lots of different statute and regulations that are, as you say, completely wrong approach for that to be taken.
Thank you. Right, we've done that one, sorry. PPE is often used in combination, eyes, ears, and head, for example. Has this been considered in the standard?
Short answer is yes.
And we also have a new working group at European level, which is considering compatibility. So this is going to be considered even further. It is something that we are considering quite significantly within this standard, but on a wider aspect is being considered within the new working group at European level also.
We have a definition of compatibility within this standard that refers to two different aspects of compatibility. One is compatibility of the product with other products that it needs to be worn with, and the other is compatibility with the person's body. So we have specifically addressed that as well.
Okay, the use of RPE in construction industry requires the user to undergo face fit testing. Effective face fit testing requires the operative to be clean shaven. How is this being addressed for persons with facial hair, beards, i.e. for religious reasons?
Shall I take that one, Sarah?
Thank you,
Yes,
Brett.
please.
I think in this circumstance, we are bound by the Health and Safety Executive Guidance on respiratory protective equipment and face fit. So at this moment in time, that's the overarching requirement as laid down by Health and Safety Executive.
Thank you.
I'd like to add on to that. If we're talking about facial hair with regards to RPE, there are solutions other than full face masks that can be used. There are hoods that are on the market that actually cater for facial hair, and wearing glasses is another issue, that the air supply will come through either through a PAPR or an airline fed unit. So that one can consider those as an option. I know that there might be risks that isn't particularly helpful with regards to CBRN type environments, but when it comes to other types of workplaces, there are again solutions that do not need to have a full face mask to be worn.
Brilliant. And I think that is the last of our questions. Very sorry for overrunning here, but thank you very much for everyone participating. I also want to thank Nat and the team for fantastically facilitating this. And if anyone has any questions, please do get in touch. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.